everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. October 10th was a big day in North Korea as it marked the 78th founding anniversary of its ruling Workers' Party. Some observers forecast that Pyongyang would attempt to launch a military reconnaissance satellite around this time, but this has yet to take place. Instead, the regime released words defending the proposed launch, saying it was an indispensable strategic option to counter the U.S. Meanwhile, the war between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas is not only shaking the geopolitics of that region, but also raising concerns on the Korean peninsula as well. Hamas terrorists have already been spotted with North Korean F-7 rocket launchers, and worries over the possibility of the North transferring weapons to the regime or even mounting possible surprise attacks against South Korea are deepening. For more on this, we have invited Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a senior fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And we also welcome Professor Brian Myers from Dongsa University. Professor Myers, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Professor Myers, first question to you. Like I said before, October 10th was a big day for North Korea. And despite some expectations, North Korea did not launch its military satellite. When could the date be?
Well, you know, the world is maybe a bit too eager to link North Korea's every launch or every display of military might to some sort of event on the political calendar. I think this is because the North Koreans celebrate so many anniversaries all year long that every launch can plausibly be linked to some special day or another. Now, some people suggest that Chairman Kim has decided to postpone the launch of the satellite until Russian experts have had a chance to take a look at things because, of course, Vladimir Putin did say in Vladivostok that he would be willing to help North Korea on this front. Now, I think, considering the fact that the North Korean media have already mentioned the possibility of an October launch, and they referenced the satellite just yesterday as something indispensable to North Korea's security. That makes me think a launch is likely to happen this month.
All right, well, it might happen this month, but we'll have to see what the timing would be for North Korea. Now, Dr. Go, what the word is focused on, of course, is whether or not Russia transferred satellite technology to North Korea. And watchers say that Russia would have provided support for a satellite rather than a projectile. What is your view on this?
Well, that's actually my expectation as well. The reason is because on the surface, Russia is in fact bound by international agreements not to transfer ballistic missile technology, which includes space vehicles. And then the reason is because Russia is a signatory to the international multilateral export control regime called the Missile Technology Control Regime. And thus, therefore, Russia, even though it's not binding, Russia is politically bound to not to transfer these kind of technologies to countries like North Korea, especially, which has multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions against the country because of its proliferation activities. But having said that, transferring satellite technology to North Korea, first of all, it's not, even though it's actually under the purview of the MTCR or Missile Technology Control Regime, it's less of a controversial, I mean, therefore controversial, but less sensitive than, say, transferring ballistic missile technology. And second, Russia could pretend that it's transferring satellite technology to North Korea as part of a civil space cooperation between the two countries. So I think Russia, if they are under a strong demand from North Korea to transfer some sort of sensitive technology to the country because of North Korea's support of Russia through ammunition assistance and so forth in its ongoing war in Ukraine, then Russia might think that transferring satellite technology is the worst of the two bad options, and also very sensitive to the, in the view of the, at least from their own point of view. But still, transferring satellite technology to North Korea is going to be a game changer in the Korean Peninsula because we don't know exactly how North Korea is going to use satellite technology down the road. So therefore, it increases level of threats against South Korea and other countries in the region. So so we expect that Russia might transfer satellite technology, but at the same time, we should be prepared for that, and then ensure that Russia pays the price for its actions.
All right, I see. Now, Professor Myers, meanwhile, it seems that arms transfer has already begun between North Korea and Russia because CBS News report pointed out that North Korea has started sending artillery to Russia following the Kim-Putin summit. Of course, it added it cannot be sure whether the transfer is part of a new long-term supply chain or a more limited consignment. But what's your view on this?
Well, to my knowledge, North Korea has never successfully manufactured anything at high volume and high quality on a consistent basis. And I think it's going to face great logistic challenges just in getting these supplies across the Yalu River on a consistent basis. And Russia knows this. So I doubt that Putin would have entered into any sort of long-term agreement, even if the North Koreans said they could handle it. Now, presuming that artillery and munitions really are being transported, which isn't certain, I think it's more likely to be a case of limited consignment of the North Koreans, in other words, shipping inventory that they've piled up over the years.
Right, so it's more likely to happen, the limited consignment, all right. Now, Dr. Go, if the world does find out that Russia had given any kind of support to North Korea through the satellite launch that might soon take place, or if it is proven that weapons were delivered to Russia, what kind of countermeasures or sanctions do you expect the U.S. to come up with?
So there are a number of options for the international community to punish Russia for its transgressions. But then at the same time, those options are limited. And the reason is because Russia happens to be the permanent member of the Security Council, which will be able to pass resolutions to impose multilateral punishments or sanctions against a country that violates international norms. So, in fact, had this been any other country that's not a permanent member of the UN Security Council resolution, a country that transfers a sensitive technology such as satellite technology, or even more, ballistic missile technology to North Korea, will be facing steep sanctions from the international community. But then Russia being a permanent member of the Security Council, that prospect is, in fact, not likely. So what's more likely is that the international community, headed by the United States in particular, is going to use two different types of sanctions. One is a diplomatic sanction, so it's not really an economic sanction, but then it's going to affect Russia's standing as a major power. Even though Russia has nuclear power and nuclear weapons and other powerful leverages, such as being a major oil producer, which gives them leverage in the energy market, Russia craves respect in the international community, and it really, I think, prizes its status as a permanent member of the Security Council and have any other kind of leverages in the international community and the other types of influence. So what the international community can do in case of a Russian transgression is to name Russia and shame its behavior, and it's going to limit Russia's room for maneuver, room for influence down the road. And I think even though it's an intangible punishment, I think Russia is going to feel the pain from that. The second option is more direct, and that option is clearly an economic sanctions. But in this case, because the multilateral sanctions in the form of the UN sanctions, it's not going to be possible. What the international community can do is count with the influence of the major powers such as in the West, such as the United States and the European Union, South Korea, obviously, Japan, to use autonomous sanctions or like unilateral sanctions against Russian entities. So I think in this case, I think what these countries can do is apply sanctions against Russian manufacturer of satellites that could be used to could be one of the web product or like a system that could be transferred to North Korea. We could sanction Russian individuals, especially government officials. A lot of them have already been sanctioned because of their involvement in the war in Ukraine. But then there could be others that haven't been sanctioned yet. And there could be imposed travel ban against these officials and their dependents. So I think on an asset freeze is if these individual entities keep assets outside of Russia. So there are a lot of options, but then at the same time, it doesn't really have an immediate impact. I think it's going to take time for the impact to have these measures to have an impact and Russian behavior. But nonetheless, we have those options on the table.
All right, I see. So the international community could come up with diplomatic sanction, naming and shaming Russia, and of course, economic sanction to go against Russia. All right. Well, Professor Myers, staying on the possibility of a weapons transfer, as the Israeli government declared an all-out war against Hamas militants, experts emphasize the need to monitor North Korea supplying weapons to Hamas, saying there have been cases of this happening in the past. And we have already seen pictures of Hamas carrying F-7 rocket launcher as well. Were they really from the north? And what were the past cases of weapon transfer, if there were any?
Well, you know, that North Korean frag rocket has a very distinctive red stripe around the middle, and it does look an awful lot like that. You know, for years now, North Korea has been supplying weapons and munitions to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and to Syria, or to arms traders based in either of those countries. And for quite some time now, some of those weapons have been ending up in Palestinian hands, with Hamas, for example, in Gaza, or with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Hamas, of course, this isn't high-tech weaponry, but as American forces learned in Iraq, the low-tech weapons can be very effective in the sort of combat situations that the Israeli troops are going to have to contend with. Now, of course, it makes good sense to monitor what kind of weapons North Korea is supplying to the region, but it's going to be difficult to establish whether North Korea is directly supplying Hamas, when these weapons likely came through intermediaries some time ago. And let's remember, Hamas is using weapons from all kinds of different countries, including the United States. So that makes everything a lot more difficult to clarify.
All right, I see. Well, Dr. Go, as our Professor Brian Myers already pointed out, it could be difficult to find out if North Korea actually directly sends weapons. But is there any chance that North Korea right now might extend arms deals with not just Russia, but also countries in the Middle East region?
So in fact, there's already a major country in the Middle East that probably trades with Russia, of North Korea in weapons, and that's Iran. We know that the Iranians and the North Koreans and exchange technologies, especially when it comes to weapons of mass destruction. We know there's signs of clear evidence that the Iranian missile designs and sometimes North Korean missile designs are interchangeable. And they probably share rocket engine designs, and that probably extends to low level of weapon systems, many other conventional weapons, even small weapons such as rifles and machine guns, and then anti-tank weapons could be shared between these two countries. So in that sense, there's already a major channel of weapons trade between North Korea and the Middle East, and that's Iran. And we know that Iran is a major supporter of terrorist groups in the Middle East, and that applies to Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. But then I think there could be another channel that could be opened up for North Korea, and that's Syria. Syria has always been, long been an ally of North Korea in the region, and it's probable that the Syria, if we don't know exactly, but but we are not exactly sure, but it's probable that the Syria also will be receiving weapons from North Korea. But then I think what Syrians would like to have now is more sophisticated weapon systems from North Korea, such as a long-range or medium-range ballistic missiles and anti-air defense systems. So the most cutting-edge ones clearly come from Russia, but or even China. But in North Korea is a willing seller of these systems. So Syria could be another candidate country that it's already a customer of North Korean weapons, but then they could buy more. And we also know that Syria is an ally of Hezbollah and by extension Hamas in the Gaza district. So yes, in that sense, I think North Korea wouldn't be opening up new markets in the Middle East, but it could be strengthening its already existing clients, sales relationship with these Middle Eastern countries.
All right, I see. We might have to look at Syria for this. Now, Professor Myers, I'd like to also focus on the impact on Korean peninsula by this war. If North Korea secures enough nuclear weapons, experts pointed out that Pyongyang might carry out surprise attacks similar to Hamas militants on Israel. How do you see this?
Well, certainly North Korea is militarily capable of conducting surprise attacks and on a much larger scale than Hamas, but it's an ultra-nationalist state. So although it has killed South Korean civilians in the past, in 2010 and 2008 and in 1987 in a terrorist incident, I don't think North Korea has much interest now in launching a surprise attack when you consider that a substantial part of the South Korean public And much of the political elite is already quite sympathetic to North Korea, as we saw 5 years ago. My point is that North Korea has pretty good prospects of achieving quite a lot peacefully or quasi-peacefully. So the situation has changed from, say, the late 1960s and the early 1970s, when North Korea did conduct incursions into South Korean territory. These days, North Korea is intent on being seen around the world as a country with a legitimate right to a nuclear deterrent. And I think that attitude precludes the sort of military adventurism that his father, the Kim Jong-un's father, and his grandfather went in for.
All right, I see. It's quite interesting to hear that North Korea might not be interested in doing such surprise attacks. But Dr. Go, it is, in my opinion, quite important to know if we can defend such attacks. And so, how would South Korea be able to respond to those attacks if any of them happens?
Well, it's something that the South Korean military has been preparing for decades. We have had incursions by North Korean special commanders in the 60s and 70s, and then in a much smaller scale throughout the 80s, and most recently we know by inference that through the landmine incident that the North Korean commanders had probably infiltrated the zone in the demilitarized zone. So in that sense, there's been a constant, sometimes intermittent, but constant incursion on North Korean commanders, like the one we have seen in the Gaza district recently. But also, we've been experiencing North Korea's missile provocations. And then last year, earlier this year, we had a drone incursion from North Korea. So all these examples of North Korean incursions and provocations indicate that North Koreans haven't abandoned the ambition to surprise us. Only reason why North Korea hasn't been able to do so is because South Korea has been strengthening its defense as well as surveillance mechanisms, using the latest and cutting-edge technologies of surveillance and then intelligence and reconnaissance. So I think that has precluded the prospect of a North Korean surprise attack, but not because the North Koreans lacked intent. But I think what's going on in Israel right now, and then the recent attack by Hamas, shows that just as South Korea is studying that scenario, so are the North Koreans. So I think what South Koreans will do is to, first of all, raise the level of detection, essentially try to detect North Korean incursions before that takes place. So that means more surveillance of North Korean territory and airspace by the South Korean military, as well as the United States. And also, in case there's the incursion by North Korea, despite all these efforts, is that South Korea has to threaten North Korea that it's going to retaliate 3 times or 10 times more for whatever amount of attack that North Korea succeeds in mounting against the South. So this is an idea about deterrence by punishment, and this is exactly what's going on in Gaza right now with the imminent ground invasion by the Israeli Defense Forces. So by clearly signaling to North Korea that if North Korea miscalculates, then it's going to be punished severely. We are hoping that North Korea doesn't make that mistake.
All right, I see. Now, shifting gears a little bit here to issues in South Korea. Now, Professor Myers, the Unification Ministry urged North Korea to immediately send South Korean nationals back home. First of all, what are the details that we know about these people detained in Pyongyang?
Well, these are apparently, first of all, 3 South Korean missionaries detained in 2013 and 2014, which was, of course, a time of quite high tension there in the first years of the Park Geun-hye administration. But the thornier problem is that of another 3 former North Korean defectors who had obtained South Korean citizenship before going back and being detained in 2016. I'm afraid it's going to be very difficult to get those former North Korean defectors back because North Korea simply does not recognize their having acquired South Korean citizenship. But the Unification Ministry's focus, it seems, is on getting back the person who has been detained the longest, namely Kim Jong-ok, the South Korean-born missionary who was arrested in Pyongyang 10 years ago. Now, of course, North Korea reacts with great mistrust, even when sympathetic South Koreans try to defect there for ideological reasons. So it's hardly surprising that a missionary caught in Pyongyang would end up in prison.
All right, I see. Now, based on what our Professor Myers told us, it seems they have been detained for around 7 to 10 years. Dr. Go, what can we say about the timing of the South Korean government's call to return people detained there?
So I think it's a little to do with the recent developments in the Korean peninsula. It has more to do with the new North Korea policy of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. One of the important changes that the current Yoon administration wanted to bring to its inter-Korean policy was to put more prominence to the North Korean human rights situation. We know that the previous administration of President Moon Jae-in put the priority on engagement rather than discussing North Korea's illicit behavior, such as human rights violations, as well as the development of nuclear weapons. We know the Yoon administration came into office promising not to do that, that they're going to address this pressing issue of a human rights violation that's taking place in the country. And so this is a long-term policy and very consistent policy action on the part of the Yoon administration. So it's not really has a little to do with the timing. It's more about with the Yoon administration putting in place the policy promises that he had made at the beginning when he assumed office last year. So we know that the Ministry of Unification is undergoing changes. It's being restructured to focus more on the human rights issues, and I think we are seeing results of those changes now. And then what we are going to see for the foreseeable future is that the Ministry of Unification is going to highlight the issue of a human rights violation in the country rather than putting priority on engagement.
All right, so it's more about the policy of current administration. Now, Professor Myers, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this last question. So South Korea is not only asking for the return of the detainees, but has been also pressuring North Korea regarding its human rights violations, as our Dr. Go pointed out. How does North Korea consider such move, and what kind of reaction do you expect from the North?
Well, North Korea thinks the human rights issue is just an excuse for its enemies to meddle in the affairs of North Korea. And this is really not just North Korea's position, but also that of China, Russia, and quite a lot of other states in the world. They believe that state sovereignty comes before human rights issues, and they always say that their critics should get their own houses in order before presuming to lecture others. Now, unfortunately, I don't think this sort of pressure right now is going to accomplish much. Not least because Chairman Kim does not want to hand President Yoon a big victory, especially not with an election coming up next year. And I think if South Korea really wants to get these people out, a kind of West German approach might be more effective, by which I mean behind the scenes negotiations, perhaps conducted through a third party. Because if you lecture Kim Jong-un in public, you're putting him in a very difficult position.
All right, so behind the scenes negotiation could be more effective. All right, Professor Myers, thank you for your insight. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go and Professor Myers, as usual, for your insights and time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.